occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And joining me in just a minute is the one and only Alejandro Rojas. I might have an in-studio guest. Donnie Goslin might join us again, the former Boston police officer. I had a lot of people really enjoyed it last time he was in studio. So he said about 90% chance he might be crawling in here while we're doing the news. And so hopefully we'll see what happens. Our guest this evening is Mary Rodwell from Australia, and we're going to be talking about her new book and a lot more. And thank you for supporting the show. If you do, it's very easy if you're not a supporter to sign up for only $2 or more a month, and that's at podcastufo.com. We are live streaming on YouTube. A lot of people are really enjoying that, so you can check that out every Wednesday night at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's, again, on our website and on YouTube as well. You can find it there. So with that, I want to start the show, the UFO updates with Alejandro. How are you?
I am good. How are you, my friend?
Things are going pretty well here in Maine.
That's good. That's really good to hear.
Yeah. Haven't fallen off any ladders or anything for a while, so...
Thank goodness. That seems to be one of your favorite pastimes.
Yes. I had a contractor here working on the roof, and he wanted me to come up and look at the roof, and I wouldn't do it. I'm just hoping it won't leak.
Take some pictures.
Yeah.
And text them to me.
Yeah, that's pretty safe. I'm going to be doing that.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad to hear that because, with your propensity to fall off of roofs and stuff, it's just better that you stay on the ground. And it's good, especially given this podcast that you do, that you stay grounded anyway.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good point. You're right about that, yeah. Mm-hmm. So what's happening in the UFO news these days?
What's happening? So, I just want to mention this one story. It's not really news. It's nothing new, but there is some news. So last time I was on your show, we talked about this sighting where this person saw these orbs flying around, and there was a deer watching them.
Right.
And the deer was just kind of casually having a good time. And so that inspired Linda Zimmerman. You probably remember her. She's the author of a couple UFO books about UFOs in New York, one of those books being Hudson Valley UFOs. She contributes to our site occasionally, but that story inspired her to write a story about dogs and UFOs. So it's titled, Man's Best UFO Witness, ? And it's a great story of a lot of different stories she's compiled of dogs being part of UFO sightings, such as, dogs kind of freaking out prior to a UFO sighting, or that sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun, this thing that she's put together. So it's a great story. You can read it at openminds.tv. But, a really fun one.
That's great. I think a lot of Linda. She's actually coming on the show on the 7th of June. We'll have her on.
Cool.
Yeah, she's great. Absolutely great.
Yeah,
well-spoken.
She's really great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
I agree. Mm-hmm. So otherwise, we do the UFO headlines all of the time. So UFO News Daily Headlines, and you can find that on our front page. But one of them I wanted to talk about today is really interesting. This is from the Hindustani Times. and it's called Meet India's UFO Hunters. And it's an interesting story, mostly about a guy named Hitesh. Hopefully I'm saying his name right. But Hitesh Yadav is his full name. He's a 20-year-old tech student at Gurgaon College. I'm probably pronouncing all of that wrong, but he runs a free UFO online magazine called UFO Magazine, and he's founder of a group called Disclosure Team India. But it's an interesting story. So he got interested in UFOs when he was a kid, and his mom woke up at midnight, and she said she was petrified because she saw behind their home an alien, about 4 foot tall, a gray skinned, same old thing with the big black eyes. She said it was like hovering in their backyard. Then it moved around and moved towards the door. And the family saw this. So Hitesh says he also saw it. And he remembers that the thing just vanished. And that was about 15 years ago. So he was really little. He's probably, 5 years old. But then I guess other people around their town and around this hospital, which is in their town of Panchkula, which is 10 kilometers away from Chandigarh. I don't know why that's significant. I'm guessing Chandigarh is, a more popular town. But anyway, they had seen this alien. So people since then have seen allegedly this alien, but they didn't really get freaked out. They felt that it was good luck to see it.
Wow.
And so that inspired him to get really involved and to start up this magazine and to start this research group that looks into UFOs. So it's it's not that small of a group, I guess. It's about 200 people. And so it's kind of cool. This Indian group that's looking into UFOs. So it's a great story that people can check out. And it tells a little bit more about some of the other members and how they work with MUFON and stuff like this. So really cool story. I love getting insight into UFO research groups in other countries.
Yeah, same here. We have a new blog writer from India. He's written a couple of really, really good blogs. Mm-hmm. Excellent research, does a lot of really great research. So I really didn't have an idea that there was a lot of people listening to the show from there, but there definitely are some.
Yeah, that's what's fun about podcasts is that you get these audiences from all over the world. And of course, Asia is really far away. India is really far away. But at the UFO Congress, we usually have at least a couple groups or at least a couple people from India that come from India all the way out here. I mean, we get people from all over the world, but India is one of those furthest countries. We usually have a couple from India, a couple from Japan, but it's always fun to talk to those guys. There was a guy who wanted us to try to help him do a UFO Congress in India, but that was just so difficult and expensive. I wish we could help him, but
that's something.
There's only one of me, man.
Yeah, that's right. As far as you know, that is.
Yeah.
You might have a doppelganger out there. You never know.
It's entirely possible. I could be cloned by aliens and sent to this planet in order to get everybody ready for mass slavery by some sort of alien civilization. That's entirely possible. But if that is the case, it is not. It's totally subconscious. Okay. Of course, I could be getting the population also ready for some sort of enlightenment. That's probably even more likely. But
you might have something like the Manchurian Candidate thing going on.
Yeah. What if they turn me on and I just start talking alien and stuff? And
we were having trouble with Skype earlier, so you did sound kind of alien-like. Wow,
that's what you said. Yeah,
amazing. Wow, is that it for the UFO news this week?
Yeah, that's what I got for today. If that's all right. I mean, there's a couple other just sightings that we always get. One of them was, which is pretty interesting. one of the Roger Marsh MUFON stories, of course, triangles yet again. And this was a guy in Savannah, Georgia. This was on April 25th at 9:45 p.m. Said he saw a couple enormous triangular-shaped objects floating in the air. So no pictures or anything, but you can see the account there at the website.
Excellent. All right, Alejandro, thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so Donnie Goslin did sneak in here. He's going to be co-hosting with me, and I will be right back after I set him up here, right after this quick music break. Well, here we are in the studio. Donnie, I think you have to lean. There you are. Thanks for showing up.
Oh, it's good to be here, Martin. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm sorry we both can't. I didn't have time to set the camera back, so we can't. You have to kind of lean in and say hi when you say hi. Let me just see if I can split it out a little bit better.
Hey, wow.
There we are. A little bit better.
There we go. Great.
Yeah. I'm way up high and you're down. It must be the chair. But anyway, thanks for being in the studio again. We're going to be contacting Mary Rodwell in just a minute.
Cool.
But I just thought I would say hi. And you just got done reading John Mack's book.
I did. I read Abduction, and now I'm probably halfway through Passport to the Cosmos.
Oh, yeah. How many, did he have more than those two books?
No, just those two.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he died in 2004. He was hit by a drunk driver over in London.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's some conspiracy about that, but I think he was just tired, and I just think what he did at that situation was just think that he was an American, looked on the wrong side of the road.
Yeah, it happens. It really does. You've been over the UK. I mean, the first thing that you do is when you cross a street, you tend to look from where the traffic always comes from. Then you step out, and before you know it, you're on the roof of a cab. Yeah. No, so a lot of people are conspiratorial with that, but I think that's great that someone of his stature did what he did and took on such a topic, which we're actually going to be talking about today with Mary. She'll be on in just a minute about that. But I think, does he ever mention in either one of those books when he went to Africa with those 60 children? Probably, it's briefly mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, in Abduction. And Passport to the Cosmos, as much as I've read, there are some references to that with respect to what interactions these children had with these beings.
Yeah. Now, Randy Nickerson is making a film. It's on our website. It's Ariel School. You'll see a banner on that. Ariel School incident, and I am going to follow up with him and see where he's at. He's been working on that film for 7 years. He has been, he's interviewed he's interviewed every child that was at that event that will be interviewed. In other words, there are some that just don't want to talk about it. But it's really something I did get to meet Emily, who was one of them last year, and to actually talk to someone in person, that's to me is one of the most amazing encounters. I don't know if you've looked into that.
Yeah, I did. I did look into it, and it was fascinating in the sense that the children, almost every single one really mentioned the focus of the communication was on environmental disaster and things that were going to occur unless mankind started to think differently, think outside the box.
Right.
We continue on the same road that we're going.
Yeah.
There's not a good outcome.
Yeah, yeah. Donnie, just for the person that's in listening now that didn't get to hear you last time, your last name is Goslin.
Right.
And you're a former retired Boston police officer.
That's right.
Hence the hat you're wearing.
Yeah, that's
Boston
right.
Strong.
Boston Strong, 617.
Yeah, yeah. So, but you've had an interest in the topic, and by the way, everyone, I live in the middle of nowhere in Maine, so it's amazing. But I live on right near the second largest lake in Maine, and you have a property there.
Yeah, we live about 5 minutes from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you just it's your lake house, right? I mean, you also live.
I spend most of the time here.
Yeah, but you're also all over the place in other countries and.
Yeah, I'm like Johnny Cash. I've been everywhere.
Yeah. But anyway, it's good to have you on, and so I'm going to, as we go along here, you just like tap my shoulder or something if you need to ask Mary a question, and we'll pull her into the interview now. So here comes Mary, and hold on, everyone, if you would. All right, it's ringing. Hi, Mary.
Hi,
there you
Martin.
are. Thank you. And here we are. We have traveled into the future. It is now Thursday morning. We do make it to Thursday morning in Australia. And thanks so much for being on the show. This is one. I can't do shows with anyone in the UK because it's in the middle of the night. But Australia is wonderful because it's like 10 o'clock in the morning for you there, right?
It's a perfect time for me because it's the best time in the day anyway, because as the day goes on, I get very tired. So this is perfect. Good.
Not that you get tired, but good that this is perfect. So Mary, for the listener, there are a lot of people that are pretty excited to have you on the show. For the listener that is not aware of what you have been up to, can you just give your background and how you basically got started into this whole situation, topic?
Well, my background is I'm a former nurse midwife, and then I went into counselling about 30 years ago, private practice where I worked with all sorts of issues that you normally get within counselling and human experiences until about 20 plus years ago, a gentleman walked through the door and said, that for this there's no support groups, for this people just think you're crazy, and proceeded to tell me about the fact that he was aware that he was having experiences with extraterrestrials going up on spacecraft. And the thing that was compelling for me was it wasn't just him in the family that was experiencing it, it was his partner and the children. So this was a family affair. And fortunately, I'd read a couple of books on this subject, which enabled me at least to understand where he was coming from a little bit. And it was through reading Communion by Whitley Strieber, which everybody, I think, within the field knows about as one of the classics, and also a book by Dr. John Mack, the former professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, who wrote Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, and then Passport to the Cosmos. So fortunately, I'd read a couple of books on this, so this enabled me to hear this gentleman, and that really started me on this road of trying to understand.
Uh-huh. And are you actually involved in regression therapy as well? Or I've heard you talk about that.
Absolutely. Counselling is one aspect. The other aspect is that I did hypnotherapy a few years, probably about 15 years ago now. And I do regressions, not just for present life, but obviously past life, but also taking people into that space if they've had something like missing time through seeing a craft or thinking something's happened. I can take them back into that space and they can work out from in trance state what actually happened. And it's been extremely invaluable, no matter what people may think about hypnosis. What Dr. John Mack said, and I absolutely concur, is that when you take somebody into hypnosis, you're getting a far more accurate account of what's happened than often conscious memory, because your consciousness will edit things out that don't feel okay to you, whereas the subconscious doesn't edit anything. It just says it as it perceives it, like a blank tape. So you actually are getting something far more accurate than, as I say, in conscious memory. So it's very, very important as part of my work.
You know, I have a friend who does that, but I'd never heard it put the way you just did. So now I understand that your subconscious just lets things flow more freely, obviously, and you're not hindered by your conscious mind. So that is interesting. I always wondered what was the edge of hypnosis that made it work the way it does. And
well, it's interesting. The more I've worked in that space, is what is brilliant about it is that people can access awareness and understanding that they would never with their conscious mind, because they're always editing in their conscious mind. Whereas if you take them into that space and you can ask very profound questions, and you can ask them to access their subconscious, superconscious, and amazing wisdom can often come through that process because there are no filters. So it's a very valuable way of accessing information, and people do this through meditation, of course, and relaxation exercises as well.
I see. Now, the John Mack, that just came up. You mentioned it, and Donnie, who's joining me here in studio, is on to his second book, reading that now. What did you think of his work overall? I was just saying how impressed I was with someone with his stature, actually took on this topic and took it seriously. And I think that's really opened the doors for a lot of people.
Well, he certainly did for me. I actually met Dr. John Mack a few months before. Tragically, he was killed in London. And what was wonderful about him, even though he came in as a skeptic, he was just open-minded. And what he discovered was, after doing all the psychological testing, and of course he had access to all of that anyway, he had no problem with understanding that they were perfectly sane. But what he did find was that they were often a lot more intuitive, a lot more aware, multidimensionally, if you have it. And when he used hypnosis, of course, he was finding out, as I am, far more of what goes on that is blocked to the conscious mind. And through it, became absolutely convinced this was not only a reality, that we could learn a great deal from those that had experiences.
Yes. Now, I was contacted last night from someone, and this happens now and then because of my show, my podcast, but I think they saw your name or whatever. I'm not really sure, but they somehow contacted me and said, I think I'm being abducted. I need help. So I have that information. And so when someone sends me something like that and needs help, what would you suggest I do? What would you do?
Well, for me, if someone contacts me, and this is on a daily basis with my work anyway, if it's Facebook or whether or not it's through my website or directly, is what I first do is send them out a questionnaire. And the reason for that is there are a lot of things with this experience. If somebody's questioning what is actually going on, and for many people, that's exactly, am I crazy or is this real? The questionnaire helps them put the pieces together a little bit, their jigsaw. And there are things that a lot of people don't know are related to this experience, but they are not aware that they are. So the questionnaire is more for them than for me. It allows them to, join the dots a little bit. And then I will find out what they feel they most need. For some, they just need more information. Others want to talk about it or want to share. Others want to explore more deeply. So it really is, my question to them then is, what do you most feel will be helpful? What do you most feel you need? And from that, we can work out the best way to help them.
Yes. Now, when someone fills out one of these forms, do you compare it? Do you compare it to like a body of work? Do you compare to the commonalities that they have?
Absolutely. For me, it's more the information than the identity ultimately, because what it's allowing me to do is seeing patterns of experience. Because a lot of these things are not as tangible as, we'd like them to be in 3D. We'd like everything to be very, very tangible, that, you can touch and feel the being, or you can touch the craft or whatever. But a lot of the time, their experiences are in an altered state. So they're questioning whether or not it's real, or was it a dream, or whatever. But there are a lot of things that now we're noticing as these patterns of the non-physical side of this experience, that are often it's in trance state, but there are changes and shifts in their awareness and abilities and their understanding that happen via the experiences. And I'm also part of another organization called the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, FREE. And what we're doing there is we're working with scientists, these are physicists, astrophysicists, psychology professors, therapists, researchers, MDs. And what we've done is put together 600 questions in our surveys. And so far, nearly 4,000 people have filled them out. And primary for that is getting the data, getting the information. And it's been absolutely profound what we're discovering. And there are things that are going to turn ufology on its head through what we're discovering through these surveys. And these are being made available. We've got statisticians actually looking at what this is showing us now. And the most important thing with this is that what we're discovering is the broad range of experiences that one way the scientists in FREE are exploring it through the quantum hologram model, so that we can actually understand how things like intuition, and paranormal experiences, clairvoyance, clairaudience, seeing energy, seeing spirits, precognition, all these things can be validated through the quantum hologram. And so there we have a model that will allow us to understand how people have these experiences and give them a tangibility, even though it's not ground traces or marks on the body or implants or photographs of the beings. It's actually showing how experiences literally affect individuals after their experiences.
Mary, you mentioned the survey, and it's a rather lengthy survey as you described it. What measures do you take as a researcher to ensure that that the questions contained in the survey don't corrupt the answers of the person, or maybe plant ideas in the person's mind that maybe they would elaborate on during a hypnosis session?
I think it's an extremely good question, and I'm not the expert here in the sense that this has been a collaboration between those working in the field. We've got Dr. Bob Davis, who's a neuroscientist, who's part of he's co-chair of the survey. We've got Dr. Klimo, who is a professor of psychology and parapsychology for 40 years. Those two are actually putting, with the help of researchers like myself and others, the questions are very much in the open-ended questions, so that people have the freedom to say and understand without anything being leading. They're very, very aware of that. Just in the same way I am as a counsellor, you don't ask leading questions. You reflect whatever they're saying to you, and you give them the freedom to actually explain their experiences. And this has been, quite an enormous task to actually create questions that allow the person to share what's happening to them. And these are the conscious recall, by the way. These are not through hypnosis. Our further two surveys, one of them is going to be covering far more of the paranormal and things like they've discovered through hypnosis or whatever. But the whole idea is finally to create a way of explaining this academically to the mainstream, so that this gets some credibility. This has been our aim all along. And what really we're doing is we're exploring a way to understand consciousness, not just extraterrestrial encounters, because we know some of them are interdimensional, extra-dimensional, and we also know that people have these experiences if they've had a near-death experience. In fact, 40% of those surveyed had near-death experiences that enabled them to then start accessing these non-human intelligences. So for them, it wasn't a UFO craft or being taken up in a craft. It was through their near-death experience, and that was a catalyst, if you like, for awareness, or an ability to access more of the matrix that allowed them then to start to interact with these beings. Others, it will be a shamanic waking up call, if you like, or a Kundalini awakening. So there are many different ways people are accessing this realm and beginning to contact these non-human intelligences. So it's not just about the UFO ET one standard abduction. And interestingly, only about 20% believe they've been abducted. The rest are actually saying that this was for them, something that they've welcomed, and that's something that they are participating in. And this is, again, turning everything we know on its head, because we've always thought, oh, you know, this is without people's choice, without their consent. And what we're discovering is that a majority, it's actually the reverse of that. So this is really fascinating data that we're getting, and it's done in a way that will cover all the traditional mandates that you need to look at, so that there is no question that we are leading those that are answering the question. And it's all anonymous, by the way. No, there is no identity with this needed. It's all about the data.
Wow. Now, when you say with their consent, how do they give their consent, or how is that discovered?
It may be conscious. They may be already aware that they've had an agreement with the beings or the intelligences. But it's also come through in hypnosis. One of the questions that I ask, amongst many others, while they're in that space is, have you, on any level, consented to this experience? And for some, it's yes, before I came here. As a soul, I've agreed to this experience because many of them see themselves connected to these beings, these visitors, and they will see that that connection means that they've sort of, if you like, decided to come in from that source or that origin of those beings in physical form or in human form because of the human experience. And some of them even, you know, recall going and meeting up with these beings and basically telling them what it's like to be human, what happens on this planet. So there's this kind of interfacing going on where these beings are understanding how it works for us in human form, in our human containers. So this is really quite revelationary as far as most people understand that there is a cooperation with many, many people having these experiences. And I'm working with even the small children. And my book, The New Human, is there's 9 chapters of children under 10 telling me how the star visitors, as they call them, or their family, and they've come from that origin to come in human form with awareness so that they can tell their family what it's like, and they will actually communicate and interface with them. And these are children, you know, as young as 4 or 5 or 6 saying, you know, you're not my real parents. My parents are in space. You're just here to look after me. And this is a pattern of, you know, many, many children that have told their parents this, and the parents writing to me, and I've even talked to these children, and they'll say, oh yes, 2 days ago, I was talking to a 9-year-old here in Australia telling me that his other mother, from where he comes from, helps him understand this planet, and he tells her what's going on and what he understands, and told me quite consciously he's aware of choosing his parents before he came onto this planet, and basically told his mother that, you know, that I chose you as I came in human form. So he remembers before he even came here where he's from.
Now, there's never been any like television show or anything like this that the kids could be exposed to. I mean, what would the skeptics say about something like that?
Well, the interesting thing for me is when you're talking to children under 10, even with all the cartoons with aliens on it and what have you, you don't get certain concepts coming up that are complex concepts that these children will have discussed with me. For example, one 8-year-old was describing being taken to a planet at night with a being which she described that took her and was teaching her how to levitate, how to use her third eye, and also showing her genetic engineering, saying she was shown how they do genetic engineering with different species, different animals, different plants, for example. and going into detail about this. This is not something you're going to get on a cartoon or anything. And how this 8-year-old also told me that when she was brought back, the craft cloaked itself so it wasn't seen by anyone around when they brought her back, for example. Another 8-year-old told me that she was taken by a craft right to see a black hole and what it was like in the black hole, where she was seeing planets exploding and coming back together again, including taking her inside a wormhole where she was seeing in almost real time things like dinosaurs and this kind of thing. Now, these aren't concepts that the average 8-year-old has any notion of. And, you know, I've had 3 children, I've got 5 grandchildren, and they're not concepts that they would come out with as part of their experience, whatever they've seen on television or whatever.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, that is some really strange things to come up with. In the chat room, Phil wanted to know what exactly is quantum holograph?
Oh, the quantum hologram.
A hologram, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, this is a model of reality that astrophysicists and physicists talk about. And please don't ask me to go into detail other than the fact that I understand that everything is like we are, if you like, within a hologram of consciousness. And basically that connects us all. And this hologram of consciousness is what we're interacting with, both through our conscious 3D, but our multidimensional awareness as well. So that, for example, things like intuition, clairvoyance, all those what we call paranormal are really parts of our ability. We don't always use them, we don't always trust them, because for many people, they're afraid that if they do that, there's something, they'll probably go a bit crazy or whatever. But what it really is, part of our nature to be, if you like, multidimensional. And what you can do when you access that side of yourself, that's when when you get the sense your friend's going to ring you, or you get a sense when you're going down the road that something's going to happen and you better be careful. Those kinds of feelings and knowings and senses come from your multidimensional self and from the hologram. So basically it's like saying a hologram of consciousness is what we are part of. And this is the way that the scientists now are coming to understand it. But if you want to know its complexity, then you need to go onto, some of the websites of the physicists as they explain it in more detail. That's as much as I can possibly explain to you. But I know from the experiences that people have that that's what we're doing. We're accessing another aspect of our multidimensional awareness when we're tapping in to those feelings, those knowings, those senses, because all of those actually we all have, but many of us shut them down because we're afraid to trust them. And yet often it's far better to trust that than your logic or your analytical mind.
Mary, I'd like to ask you, just to follow up on the 80% consensual number, which seems to be pretty much in line with what Dr. Mack reported in his first book, which really, for me, was a game changer, because I had always thought of this phenomenon as I understood it at the time, to be something that was completely against one's own wishes. But 80%, according to Dr. Mack, and now we're hearing it from you as well, claim that this is some sort of consensual experience. But I'd like to kind of mine a little bit of this whole consensual experience. Is there some prototypical experience that they have that seems to be common among all the consensual people? In other words, is this some sort of a what Dr. Mack kind of referred to on many different occasions with this 80% consensual, is that there was some sort of communication with respect to environmental disasters and things that needed to be avoided in order to ensure that humanity continues. Did you, in your research and the people that you attend to, do you see this sort of communication occurring?
Absolutely. Excuse me. One of the things we've discovered is 85% found their experiences transformative. And by that, it means they've changed their whole paradigm through the experience. And everything that they've ever accepted as a truth in their 3D educational conditioning and programming often now becomes a question. But one of the things they notice from the experience, and many of them have said this, that all life becomes precious. That some of them say, I can't even stand on an ant now. I can't see the pain and on this planet. I can't cope with the aggression. I can't cope with the war. Some of them become environmentalists, where they know that they almost think it's like their mission, that they have got to do something now to protect the planet. They become very, very aware of that kind of thing, and they'll get involved and become quite activist in it. Many of them want, more rural, holistic lifestyles. They change their diet. Many of them become vegetarian. Others want to be healers and want to support one another. They lose total interest in materialistic values. No longer interested in generating any kind of, funds or whatever other than survival and what have you. So it's literally everything within their framework is altered and changed. And this is the transformative side that I'm fascinated by, because, when everybody says to me, what's their agendas? What is it that they're, what are they doing this for, and all the rest of it? Without doubt, the 85% are saying that it is about shifting the consciousness of the human from one of far more blinkered awareness of, the 3D reality, and showing them that they're multidimensional, but also showing them how we're connected to everything, that everything, that we are part of a consciousness, if you like, that also is part of what these beings are, because the way that they communicate most often is through telepathy. And my sense is that when you're getting people becoming more sensitive, more aware, more empathic, many of them start to feel this communication with these beings on a telepathic basis. And what I've also discovered is a lot of the children that are being born now, what I call the new upgrades of children, are being born telepathic. And I've had parents write to me. I recall an email only recently of a woman telling me her 3-year-old daughter had been telepathic since birth, and she said, my biggest problem, Mary, is that she not only reads my mind, but those around us as well. And she said, and it's, she's 3 years old, I have to watch my thoughts all the time because she knows what I'm thinking. She's not the only one. We're discovering now a lot of these children that the parents write to me about or talk to me, they say that they have the ability to tap into thoughts and emotion and feelings, and they are hypersensitive. And these are the new programs that I talk about, the new humans, are these very aware upgrades, as I call them, and I talk about them in my presentations. And these new upgrades are being recognized by a number of individuals within different professions. And I know 2 molecular biologists that talk about these new upgrades. One of them is in Sweden, Dr. Olsen, and she talks about the letter people, the new human, the quantum. And these are often diagnosed or labeled as ADHD or Asperger's or dyslexic or some forms of autism, but actually they are experiencing a far more broader version of reality, a multidimensional reality. And that is why they appear dysfunctional, because they're already operating from that level rather than the 3D, the older models like myself are operating from. So they struggle, and that's the reason they struggle. And one gentleman who found he was diagnosed as ADHD when in his 50s, Neil Gold, who's a ufologist in Hong Kong, wrote a book, Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind, and he changed ADHD to always dialed into higher dimensions, because he'd always seen reality differently, even from a small child. And a lot of these children that are being diagnosed as ADHD are actually, I believe, new programs that are getting us into a more aware species, or becoming a more aware species.
Now, it seems to be like almost 2 schools of thought. One is that we were hybrid as we were seated here, in ancient times. And then, so in that case, What are your thoughts on that, first of all, I should ask you? Do you think that's what possibly happened to the human race instead of evolution or partial evolution and combined with that?
Absolutely. I've actually got a whole chapter on the DNA where I've tapped into this whole area because I think it's really important that people understand a little bit more of the anomalies that have been found in human DNA. And as I mentioned, a whistleblower geneticist that was in Lloyd Pye's book who explored all the information on the Star Child's skull, and he wrote the book The Intervention Theory. And in it, he's got a whistleblower statement from a geneticist basically stating that we're hybrids, that he knows and can see in our DNA where we've been spliced and various things. He said it's absolutely as obvious as anything, but if you dare to try and say this, you'd be hung out to dry. But this is being noted. And the other thing that's fascinating to me, and it's already there, that you've got Cro-Magnon and you've got the Neanderthal, then you've got what's called the missing link, and then suddenly you have Homo sapiens sapiens, who's twice the brain size, for example, and 223 genes that that were a sideways insertion of genetic material that are all to do with higher psychological functioning, suddenly being part of who we are as well. And you have those that have interactions with ETs that say, and are being told by the ETs, that they have put their DNA with our DNA, for example. So everything, and even Francis Crick, co-founder of the DNA molecule, in his book Life Itself, was saying the same thing. He said we were seeded from the stars. He was also saying they, did certain things and until we get ready to be more evolved. So we've been, if you like, dumbed down because some of our genes are not switched on yet. They only say that we use 5% of our DNA and the rest is some kind of junk litter. But what I'm finding is that there's part of that now that these experiences are telling us that is being switched on, being activated. And this is why more and more people are becoming more aware, becoming more multidimensionally aware, because that part of their DNA is being activated, and they're relating more and more to these extraterrestrials that have put something in the human DNA, and they will say, well, I feel I'm from the Pleiades, or I feel I'm from Arcturus, or whatever. But what they're doing is, what I believe is happening, that part of their ET DNA is being activated, and that's why they start to feel their connections to these species that are visiting us from all over the galaxy.
So why wouldn't, a couple of things on that, why would they have waited so long to activate that part of their DNA? That's one of the questions. And the other one is, we'll just answer that part first, if you would.
Well, I don't know the mind of these intelligences that are working with us, but what seems to have happened is that we've been allowed to evolve in the way that most, from what one 8-year-old told me, they do this in other galaxies and other universes. They seed planets and they wait and allow them to evolve in their own way. My understanding is that because now we are becoming spacefaring species, and because we have technology now that is destructive, there is a great fear of what we will do with it before we become aware that we're part of a galactic community. And so, the way I describe it from what I understand is that if you give a 3-year-old a loaded gun and they don't realize that it can kill people, you're in trouble. So you've got to upgrade the child and give it the maturity to understand what it's dealing with. And this is what I think is going on at the moment. There's a fast exponential upgrade program going on, and this is why these new children are so aware and activated, because they know how it works. They're already interfacing with these beings which they see as part of their family, their star family in many, many cases. And so they're coming in with these abilities and awareness, which is helping us as we learn from them. And this is what's happening. A lot of the parents are learning from the kids, that we are part of a consciousness, but also part of a galactic community. And we need to grow up and take responsibility for what we're doing. And this is part of this exponential increase now in this activation that's going on. Certainly it's part of it. It's probably not all of it at all, but it's certainly coming out in, I've worked with over 3,000 individuals globally, and the parents and the children that are coming up. And this is what's coming out of this, is why they are so much more aware, because they're basically helping us to grow up and mature spiritually, psycho-spiritually, if you like, in a way that we can interact in a healthy, balanced, and less aggressive way with our galactic neighbors, if you like.
Now, when did you notice that these children were coming forward and talking to their parents? How long ago would you say that you know that this had started?
Oh, look, I think that there's been upgrades been going on for possibly the last 100 years. And the older generations had these abilities, but often they were squashed because they were told it wasn't real and not to believe it. But the interesting thing is that almost each generation from that has been able to just be that little bit more aware, or at least to honor some of it. I was talking to a 79-year-old lady in Norway, and I spoke about the new children and their abilities. And she said to me, she came up to me afterwards and said, "You're the very first person in my life that is actually spoken about all the abilities that these new children can do." She said, "I've been able to do it all my life. I could call the sheep in with my mind and nobody knew how I did it." But she said, "I'd never heard of anyone else being able to do it." I think what's happened is that with the upgrades of these each generation, more and more of the parents have been more accepting because they've experienced it, but have not known what to do with it or how to understand it. But because of the internet, because there's information going out there now, more and more are recognizing this in their children. And instead of telling them, "Don't be silly," when you say you're seeing a little blue being or you're seeing a little green being and they're taking you up on a spaceship, they're not telling them anymore, "Don't be silly, don't talk about it," as they may have experienced from their parents. Stop talking about this. It's just your imagination. Don't be silly. Because these parents are allowing their child to say, "Look, this is what I experienced," because in their heart they know that this is a reality as well because they've experienced it. You're hearing more and more now, and people are approaching me. I'm getting emails from parents from all over the globe telling me what their young children are saying and how they understand their reality and that they're not from here. And that some of them say, "Look, I just want to go home. I don't like this planet very much." And the parents relate to it because that was how they felt when they were young kids, but it was squashed or conditioned out of them or programmed out of them. And so they're saying, "But I don't want to do that with my children." So there have been waves and generations of upgrades slowly coming to the point where now we've got children being born that are fully awake to who they are, why they've come, with the abilities, you'd call them psychic abilities, intuition, telepathy, precognition, ability to a certain telekinetic abilities, for example. So they've got all these kinds of what, were considered gifts, but it is natural to them. And the only time that they'll stop doing it is if they're told it's not okay. And if they're told it's not okay, then they will stop doing it and they will dumb it down.
I come from a background of forensic science, and as a police officer and also as a lawyer, we talk a lot about evidence. We talk a lot about circumstantial evidence, physical evidence, all these different types of things that tend to prove that a certain thing is real. And that's why, quite frankly, I've come to this subject very reluctantly and very skeptically, and I still maintain some level of skepticism. But having said that, what I read in Dr. Mack's book is what I found, what I got out of it really, was that there was a series of anecdotal evidence that came to light, but it was remarkably similar across different people who had never communicated with one another. And I still have to say that I remain skeptical about this, but I have an open mind. But let me ask you this. What is it about this, and I'm sure you approached this when you first became aware of it with a healthy dose of skepticism. What is a particular case that you have treated, or a person that you have interviewed that kind of changed your worldview on this? Can you give us some particulars on that?
Oh gosh, there are so many. I absolutely understand where you're coming from, and I'm an ex-nurse midwife. I deal with a lot of tangibility in that reality and what have you, and I really wanted to be clear that I wasn't getting carried away. And you say you're open-minded, and I'm open-minded, but like you, it doesn't equate to gullibility. What I have done with not only with the adults but with the children too is seeing where their information can be corroborated, for example, as much as possible, and also try and see if I can find information through science, through other knowledge that may corroborate their information as well. Very, very important, and I think everyone should look at it from both angles, because you need to be able to have something tangible here with it. But I'll tell you something that was really quite fascinating, and it's to do with the children again, because if I get information from one child, I may very well see if I can get similar information from another and see if it's the same kind of information. And this involves two young girls. One was 7 and one was 8. And the one family, the mother and the daughter had both experiences, and the daughter had got a symbol that she was shown on a craft. When she visited, she said she was taken to Mars. And this symbol she had drawn, and she said, I have a bit of an understanding of it, but I'd like to know if anyone else has seen this symbol. So I took the drawing, and I also knew of another young lady with the whole family had experiences, and this was in the US. These families obviously have never communicated, and this is really very important. And I sent the symbol, and I said, does any of the children, and one was 12, a little boy, and one was an 8-year-old girl, and I said, have seen this symbol or have any idea of it or any sense of what it is? And what was absolutely fascinating was the little girl said, yes, I've seen it when I was on a spaceship when they took me to Mars, and it means this, this, and this. And so it was absolutely fascinating, because I sent the information from that family back to the first the girl and her mother, and the little girl said, yes, that was exactly what they told me. Now, this was just one symbol where there was no front loading, there was no information where she'd seen it, how she understood it, or anything. It was primarily, have you ever seen this, from the father, who was very clear. He's an engineer, and he was very clear that there was absolutely no front loading. So you get things like that going on, which can be quite amazing in the sense of how would that happen. I have also talked to children about their experiences on the craft and what they've understood, and I've had adults say the identical things about how they're being taught, how things are holographic, how they use their mind to create things. So many have talked about being shown how to use their mind flying craft, that the craft is conscious, for example. And a lot of these people, it's the very first time they've ever shared this. And I always remember, and this was really profound for me, it was a 59-year-old man. He was an Australian man, and he rang me up one day and said, I've had experiences where I think are extraterrestrial, but I want to know a little bit more. And I sent him the questionnaire. He phoned me back in tears. He was so emotional, and he said to me, how do you know about my life? Because everything he'd read in that questionnaire resonated with him to such a profound degree, it shocked him. And he said, I've never spoken about this to anyone. Nobody knows this is my experience. It's the first time that I've ever even explored it. So you get those kinds of reactions from people, and it leaves you in no doubt that how profound this is for them. And yes, many have the tangible marks on the body. Some have had implants taken out, and Dr. Roger Leir did some wonderful pioneering work. And I mean, he was a good friend of mine. And, he's taken out a number of the implants, knowing through his investigations that there were things about them that couldn't be explained. there were compositions of them that didn't look they came from this planet. Some of them were highly magnetized, etc. So you've got this. You've got people that find themselves outside with no clothes on and all the doors locked. Children, adults, having to knock.
Oops. Uh-oh. We froze. Hang in there, everyone. It looks like it's a Skype issue. And we will hang up on her and call her back, see what we can do here. Okay. Just hang on, everyone. And hopefully we'll remember where she was at. And hopefully her internet did not go out. If so, Donnie, looks like...
Australia has terrible internet service, I'm told.
The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable.
Something. Okay, let's give it another try. So, Donnie, we may be doing hour 2.
Oh, boy.
We'll see. As it is right now, Skype is not. She's not picking up on Skype.
She may have lost her internet.
Yes, I have heard a number of things about the internet in Australia, and we have another guest coming up in Australia in just a couple of weeks, Ben Hurl. A few other guests coming up. I will just read while we're trying to get a hold of Mary. We have next week. We have John De Sousa. He's a former FBI agent. Oh, Mary. Wow. There you are. You're back. All right. Thanks. I don't know what happened. Was it your internet that... do you have any idea?
I have no idea. It was working as far as I know, but look, who can say?
And you probably have no idea where you went off, or do you?
I'm not really sure. I was talking about the tangible markers of experiences with the implants, and this kind of thing, which are very important for people to understand that they're having experiences. And I think I mentioned Dr. Roger Lear. I don't know if you recall that. Yeah, because those tangible markers have been very important, but also people being found outside with all the doors locked, for example, this kind of thing, the missing time episodes where they can't qualify a couple of hours on their way on a journey sometimes and have no idea what happened. All those kind of more physical things, but what is much harder to quantify, and I really understand, from a 3D perspective, how do you quantify the changes, the psychospiritual changes that people experience after contact? And this is really what the organization of Free is about, because with having a model to explain how you can access the hologram and your multidimensional self through the quantum hologram allows us then to explore that side of this experience in a way that will give us better understanding. And exploring consciousness really is what we're talking about here, because this is how many people change. It's their consciousness that changes, their whole focus changes. And when people say, well, where is, what is the evidence? The evidence is you don't change in such an important transformative way unless something real has happened. You know that someone who has maybe an experience in their lives, a profound experience in their lives, whether or not it's a grief experience or whether it's a spiritual experience, they are changed by it through that experience. The exact same thing happens through these kinds of experiences. And also what goes with that, and I know this is going to sound maybe very weird to some people listening to this, they start to do unusual things. For example, they start to draw the beings that they've seen, for example. They may find themselves drawing strange writing or scripts. They may find themselves doing strange geometric drawings or symbols, for example. Others start to find themselves coming out with unusual languages, we call these star languages, from simply their experiences. Now, why do people do this? You don't do this from a hallucination. You don't do this from a fantasy. You're doing it because something's happened to trigger these unusual expressions after contact. Why do people suddenly want to change their lives completely and have a more holistic lifestyle, get interested in healing, get interested in the ecology, get interested in wanting to make a difference from being, 3D? One of the co-founders of Free is a lawyer, very atheist lawyer, very 3D, until he had a huge craft go over his house, which his wife and his daughter saw. And a being that came, his dog was dying, was very, very sick, and they saw this being that actually healed the dog. After this experience, Ray Hernandez is his name, now no longer interested in 3D. He's been fascinated with quantum physics and was inspired to create, with myself and Dr. Edgar Mitchell and also Dr. Rudy Shield, Free, the organization of Free, from that experience, from having his world turned upside down. This is what I mean. If this is a hallucination, you don't actually change your life. And that is an evidence of a reality. Just as trauma can change the way people react, and people, we've got PSTD, after a traumatic experience, people will often have this as well. Of course, if they've been traumatized and they don't know what's going on, will also have post-traumatic stress disorder as well. So it's evidence of a reality by the mere fact that they have these transformative changes. And 85% of the 3,000 plus that did this survey said that they had psycho-spiritual changes. Everything changed in the way that they saw the world. They had a huge paradigm shift. They became more psychic, more aware on multiple levels. And it can be very scary because, 1 minute you're seeing the world through this lens, and the next minute you're seeing the world multidimensionally. You're sensing emotion, you're sensing feeling, you're aware of what's going on in another part of the planet because you're able to access it. This is what occurs from these experiences. And there is your evidence. Your evidence is from the transformative effects of this experience. And I know that for a lot of people, that's a hard one to swallow. But if they've looked into NDEs, the near-death experiences, any of these kinds of experiences, it's a similar kind of psycho-spiritual transformation.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever heard anyone mentioned anything about the near-death experiences, like propelling into what they think may be abductions or whatever. But going back to something you said a few minutes ago, was something about this young child saying that they were taken on Mars. And right away, like, the red flags go up for me if I hear something like that, because it kind of goes back to what the contactees used to say, that they used to go to Venus and Mars and all that. But I always wonder why a being would take someone to a planet that's basically uninhabitable, and what would the purpose be other than, just being in the craft?
Very important question, and one that certainly challenged me too, because, to hear that they're being taken to other planets and being shown things. What I understand is that when they go up on the spacecraft, they're taught a great deal that we don't understand. One of the young girls called it magic school, and they taught them about time and space, which is a funny kind of magic school, but what they're really saying is, this is to do with physics, etc. What I seem to understand is not only are they taken on craft where they have lessons, they're educated on the craft. And one of the little 8-year-olds was telling me in this very office, when he explained to me that when he goes up on the craft, he goes up there with a couple of his school friends. He doesn't know whether they remember or not. And he described being in a room where there were other human children. And I said, so when you say human, are there other children that are not human? He said, yes. And I said, how do you know? He said, well, because their eyes are different, and they are different. And I said, so what happens? And he explained to me they use their consciousness, their mind, to be taught things and how to manipulate things with their mind, like, telekinesis, for example. And they are shown what they can do with their consciousness. But they are also shown, more of what happens in space, the planets, the history of the planets. much of it that we don't understand. When I was talking to a 16-year-old, and I said to him, he said, I've got a past life memory where I was on Mars. And he said, I can actually build interstellar craft. And I said, well, how did you know? Was this because you were taught on the spacecraft, or you have what some of them call downloaded information? And he said, no, it's because I remember I used to do that when I was on Mars. And he was talking about having a life on Mars. And so it seems that they're taught also about the civilizations that were on other planets, and being taught more of the history that we don't know in our very insular Earth history, where we're given, the snippets of what our own history is. They're being taught a galactic history. And this is part of the reason they're shown these different planets and what's on them and how to understand them. So they're being taught literally more of an understanding of the nature of every species, not just humans, if that makes sense. And fascinating it is that there's not just one or two of them that talk about being shown these different planets or going interdimensionally. These are many hundreds now that have said the same thing to me. And they say the problem is that, for most of humans, they've got no idea. How can you tell them this? How can you explain to them this is what you are aware of or you've been shown? Because most people just shake their head and say, oh, you're crazy or whatever. So that's the problem. We are being exposed to all of this data, but we are conditioned and programmed so heavily that it's really hard to own that maybe, just maybe, some of this may have integrity. This may actually be what's going on. And until we start to at least be open to hearing it, we don't have to believe it all, but we at least can be open to hearing what they have to say. Maybe we'll get a better idea of what's really going on, rather than saying, oh, well, I can't take that on. That's just too weird. As soon as we do that, we shut down our understanding. And I think we're being challenged to open to the possibilities, even if we don't take them on board at this moment in time.
One of the things that I saw in Dr. Mack's book, excuse me, was a device which was purportedly used to perform an examination on human beings in this situation. And it was drawn by two different people that Dr. Mack was interviewing or he was that he was counseling, and they came up with the same almost identical drawing, an identical scenario on how this thing was used. These people didn't know each other. These people were from different parts of the country. This type of thing had not entered into the popular discussion, really, of these type of events. So really, it's remarkable in the sense that two different people come up, draw the same object from different parts of the world, and describe the object being used in the way that it was. So I guess that's kind of a way to ask you. You had mentioned two children who had drawn the same type of symbol. Could you kind of describe the symbol to us?
It was almost like a T. It was, but more cuboid, if you like this. But I found that same correlations with some adults with some of the symbols, because that's been an area that I've been fascinated by, is how can, if someone is saying this is, what I'm being shown, or this is a symbol, or this is whatever it is, if I get others that have no connection to one another, and of course as a researcher you're very careful about, there's not any cross-contamination or whatever, and you get drawings of the craft, you get different beings, what they wear, whether they've got symbols on them or whatever. If you can see that you've got 2, 3, 4 or 5 that are all doing the same thing, then it really gives it a tangibility. And it's exactly the same with some of the things they may say about what they experience. When you talked about this kind of object that, was doing a kind of healing procedure or some kind of thing, I've had children draw a particular object, very similar to that, saying this one was like a scientist. I remember this 13-year-old from Canada doing a drawing of this being and holding this object and saying he was a scientist and it was all to do with DNA. So he was aware that it was connected to DNA, and that was one of the instruments. And he said it actually helped. It wasn't like a gun or anything. It said it helped you, put you to sleep. So he was aware it was like it acted like an anesthetic or whatever it was, for example. So they often have an understanding of what these things are. Very, very important that if I can qualify in some way or corroborate in some way the stories of the children, then absolutely it helps us all then to, you know, open our mind to the possibilities and whatever. And I've, through my, you know, my book, particularly my second book with the children, you know, I've done my best to corroborate as much as I can similar stories or similar understanding. But the bottom line is for me, you know, that really gives me heart with this is the number of emails when I've done presentations and I've shown some of this material where somebody said that's been exactly what I saw, or that was exactly what I experienced, or that was how I understood it. And the fact that it's resonating with more and more people, as far as I'm concerned, is the most important thing of all. I'm not out to prove anything. I mean, who am I? I'm a researcher. I'm primarily a therapist. You know, I want to help people to understand and cope with what's going on with them, someone who's going to listen, not judge, and allow them to explore what's been going on for them with as much openness as they need that to be. They need someone to listen without saying, oh, well, I can't believe that. Oh, well, when you've just said that, I can't believe that. As soon as you do that, you shut them down. How are we going to find out if we don't give them that open slather, that open mandate to at least say, this is how I understand my experiences? And then with the information that you can offer them, you may be able to offer corroboration with certain aspects of their experience. And then it's up to them whether they take on board and believe and understand it, or if they say, look, it's all too hard, I'd rather not, believe any more of this. Even if I know I've experienced it, I'm not cool with it or whatever. It really is up to them. My job is just to collate the information. I'm not there to judge it. I'm there just to tell the story and say, this is how I've come, this is what I'm being told. This bit I can corroborate with someone else. At the end of the day, it's up to the person reading the story or listening to the story to make up their own mind whether or not this makes sense to them and resonates with them or not. I'm not here to prove anything to anybody. That's not my job. My job is to just produce the research that I have and let people make up their own mind, because ultimately that's all that matters.
Yeah, you're right. People do shut down as soon as you don't believe them, and listening is really important, I think. I've seen that happen before as far as people shutting down. Now, Donna on the message board wanted to know, what is the difference between the indigo children and an upgrade?
Very good question. And I, in my book, The New Human, I actually address what metaphysicians are calling indigos, crystal children, children of light, golden children, all those ones. They're noticing difference in behaviors. They're noticing difference in attitude and personality in those particular labels. What they're not taking on board, and this is what I have seen, is when you bring in the extraterrestrial aspect of that, what we're seeing is that these are another name for the upgrades. But I will say what you bring in with that are those that we call ADHD, always dialed into higher dimensions, for example, Asperger's. I think dyslexia is another program. I think some forms of autism are another program, because the autistic children, they're discovering now, are telepathic. Many of them are telepathic, and there's some really credible research that's showing that a lot of the autistic children happen to be telepathic and happen to be accessing more of a multidimensional reality, and that is why they struggle, because we're trying to put them into a smaller box of 3D, and they struggle with that. The same goes for those, the ADHD, that they're operating at a faster speed, if you like. And to give you a bit from a more tangible way of looking at this, Dr. Brown, a molecular biologist, said the exponential increase in autistic, ADD, indigo children, they have new genetic architecture which allows them to see the world in a multidimensional fashion. He believes research would show dormant genetic regions are being reintegrated into the biological systems and occurring in all of us to produce expanded awareness. Their brains work faster, They have access to more information in the beginning. In the classroom, learning is much faster than normal. And he says, I believe they already know what's being taught. There's more of that he says about these new humans or new generations of human. Dr. Lena Olson, also a molecular biologist in Sweden, calls them letter people. And she says that she's one as well. And she's ADHD, stroke, slightly autistic or whatever. And she's saying, even their sensitivities, they hear at a broader range of hearing. Their visual spectrum is broader as well, so they're seeing and sensing more. Even the sensitivity on their skin. So this is why they react in the way that they do, and how they struggle to be focused in 3D, because it's a lot slower in 3D, and they're having to shut themselves down to be able to even concentrate, because they're operating all up here. And I've had educators contact me. I've had, along with parents, saying everything you're saying is identical to what my child is experiencing. And there are many educators out there that know this is going on. And I'm in touch with them, who are actually telling me they believe there has to be a new way of teaching, a new kind of curriculum for these new programs of human, which are being assisted by these intelligences, they believe. And certainly the children seem to understand their connection with these beings which they're interfacing with, and talk about they'll call them their teachers or their guides, and one may be blue and one may be green, and they're teaching them information they don't learn in their schools here. So people can take this for what they can believe it or not, but this is what I'm finding, and this is why I've written what I've written, because it seems to be a global phenomena.
Now, I know in the Westall incident that there wasn't any supposed abductions or anything like that, but Ed in the message board wanted to know, have you ever researched that Westall school case, and how had it, and the good question in this, I think, is, if so, how had that impacted the children later in life?
It's a very good question. I'm up to date with the Westall incident, and Shane, who put the documentary out. I have only heard of one person that the outcome for them was profound, but I haven't ever spoken to any others. And it is something I would really like to know, because I do know the one that was investigated by Dr. John Mack in Zimbabwe, where they also saw a craft and described the beings. Many of those, as adults, have shifted and changed in terms of from that contact or that seeing that craft or whatever. There's also been one in the Solomon Islands that was similar to that as well. And I believe there was one over in California, another gentleman told me about. So it does seem to be schools can sometimes be, have this kind of thing happen. But certainly it does seem that with Westall, I've heard at least one case, although I haven't worked with them, where they had shifts and chains after seeing the craft. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, because what I've also discovered is that when someone sees a craft, and they may think it's only for a few minutes, in fact, being on the craft, they may have actually been picked up, or they may have had a downloading of information and been totally unaware consciously that that's gone on. Because when people write to me with sightings, often I'll say to them, did you feel differently afterwards? And they'll write back and say, well, actually, yes, I did. And that usually means there's been an interaction, because when they go up on the craft, of course, they have this ability to stretch time, so that you think you've been gone, you think that it's been an instant thing, or you've just seen it for a few minutes, but actually you may have been on the craft for much longer and not realized it, because that seems to be an ability they have to stretch time when you're actually on the craft itself. All these things are so way out of our understanding of physics. But then again, I think that's what we've got to realize too, that we really don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what's possible or impossible. And the only way we're going to find out is listening and hearing from these experiences.
In your practice, have you encountered unrelated people, whether they're children or adults, that have been abducted or they've been experienced at the same time, something along the lines of what was alleged to have occurred in the Allagash, just north of us here in Maine. It's a very famous case. But I'm kind of interested in unrelated adults or children that tell a remarkably same story.
As one, I can tell you that, I mean, there's lots of others where families go up and they go into different parts of the spacecraft and they will describe it from different angles, if you like, from their perspective, the child describing it, the adult describing it, where they were taken away. And there's lots of those kinds of cases. There was one which was in the Blue Mountains where a group of investigators went in because they believe there's a base there, and also had some interaction which they think was with a Yowie as well. But they asked me to, when I went to give a talk in their group, whether I would regress them all that had gone on that trip, because they knew something strange had happened. They were aware there was high strangeness, and they deliberately not talked about it because they knew I was coming, and they wanted to get their individual understanding so that we could ultimately put it all together and see if it correlated, if you like. And it was fascinating how each one had their own awareness of being taken. They were taken to a base, they were shown various things, and each one was able to describe it from their perspective. But the correlations were amazing about what they'd seen, what beings they'd seen, where they'd been put, and how they'd seen it from their particular perspective. And it was because they were researchers themselves. There was no front loading with any of them. They really wanted to find out whether or not it was the same experience or not. So there are things like this going on all the time, which, you know, are wonderful for us as researchers, because there we are getting that kind of, you know, that understanding that it really is a reality when you've got when you've got those correlating stories or whatever. So, you know, how it's verified or whatever. So yes, it is my answer to that. And I've had them, two people who were friends in different parts of the country, both aware they're on the same night they've been taken up, and then being, you know, having it from their perspective, but also knowing that they were taken up on the same craft and living in different parts of the country, for example, this as well. So there's lots and lots of stories like that. I mean, it you know, I find it absolutely incredible how that can happen and how amazing it is.
Your survey that you send to people, have you ever weeded out, let's say, someone that was a wannabe? You know, they wanted to be, I mean, there must be those people too. Are there?
Not as many as you'd think. I'm often, when I do the media, you know, newspapers and radio and whatever, they're always wanting to know, you know, aren't these people just self-seeking, wanting to have their own fantasy and, you know, all the rest of it. And this is my answer. I have people flying over from America, from UK, from Italy and Malaysia, as well as domestically. And, you know, if they're flying all that way to come and see me, they're not coming to tell me a fantasy. They're coming because they really want to know stuff and they really want to know about their experiences. I'm not going to make them famous. I'm not going to, you know, put their name up in lights. They're going to get no money from me, nothing. They're coming because they need to tell their story. So there's actually, to be honest, I would think 0.5 is probably the person that really desperately may try and make up a story. But, you know, you can suss them out very, very quickly. I've been in this, you know, for over 20 years. There are classic indicators. Not all of them are out there. You can soon tell if someone's just wanting this to be their experience and what have you. So it's very, very minimal. Most people really, they just want to know they're not crazy. And they just want to make sure that they're not leading themselves on down. Do you know, the most skeptical, and I know most people don't realize this, the most skeptical of all are often the experiencers themselves, because they want to prove to themselves they're not crazy. And that is more important to them than any kind of fame or fortune, which most of them anyway would rather not. I mean, if you're a lawyer or you're a doctor or if you're a psychiatrist or a psychologist, the last thing you want actually is to be having experiences you can't explain through your own background or whatever, or professionally. And I meet all of them. I'm meeting scientists, you know, with, you know, several PhDs or whatever who are experiencers and saying, you know, there's no way in the world I can come out and say, this is my experience. And yet This is what is going on. So most of the time they're questioning and they're hoping it's not true rather than actually trying to create it, because what are they going to get? They're going to people laughing at them, mocking them, telling them they need to take lithium or there's something wrong with them. They are not going to get their name in lights, and they're certainly not going to get any money. So why would they? So I know it's a long way of saying this, but most of the time they're people with very real experiences.
Right. It sounds like someone's trying to contact you on Skype. Keep hearing something come in.
Do you want me to put
you can mute the notifications, but I don't know if you can do that while we're going along here. Okay. So I've said this before on some of the shows. If this type of thing was happening to me, like I thought I was having, these experiences, I don't think I could function. It just seems like it would be all-consuming, and I don't think I could have a normal job or a normal life in any type of way. How do these people function?
With difficulty, to start with. Primarily because of the confusion of what the hell is going on. Am I going crazy? Who's going to believe me? This isn't real. How can it be real? I have a friend who's a geneticist, and for the first 9 months of his experiences, after seeing a mantid being in his bedroom, and having all these high strangeness experiences and downloads, he went to a psychiatrist, and it was quite certain that he was going round the bend. It was only when the psychiatrist couldn't really give him any answers and was just offering him medication, he decided to look into it from other levels. And eventually, I remember the first time he came to see me, and he said, it was great talking to you, Mary, but I was pretty certain you were bonkers. And it wasn't till sometime later, when he did his own traveling around and more investigations, he finally came to the conclusion that he had to go down the rabbit hole. So the reason I wrote the book Awakening was as a process for people who are questioning their sanity. And it was, how do you know you're not crazy? These are the reasons you know you're not crazy. What do you do about the fear? Who can you go to who isn't going to, who's going to support you? What do you do when you start having, precognitive information, or you feel that you know stuff, or if your psychic abilities, start to see energies, or you start to see orbs, or you start to see beings in your lounge room? What do you do about that? How do you manage that? And so people go through this process of confusion and conflict. Maybe for some it's many months before they get to a point where, this seems to be a reality, it seems to be happening, I can't run away from it, let me try and understand it. And that's when they start going crazy, with looking at all the information on the internet. They absolutely bombard themselves with all this stuff so that they could start to get a handle on where it fits for them. And that can be all-consuming for months, or even for some people even years, till a point comes when there's an acceptance. Well, you know what? I think it's real. I don't care what anybody else thinks anymore. It's what's happening. It's what's going on. And there's an integration and an acceptance. And then they come into a better place. They know that most people aren't going to believe them, so that's okay. I just don't talk to them about this. I talk to people who do understand. And then you get the networks and the buddy systems and all those kinds of things. And then a lot of them open up to communication. They start to interface with the beings and asking them questions and getting an understanding. And then they get more into the contactee type of thing, where they're actually doing this communication. And they just accept that there are a lot of people out there that don't get it, are uninformed, and don't believe it. It's frustrating. It's even hard if your partner struggles with it, or your family struggles with it, or your kids struggle with it. But many people are saying, but I can't deny it anymore. This is my reality. This is how I am. And, the ones that step out the space closet, as I call it, Dr. Lena Olsen is one of them. I mean, it's huge in Sweden to come out as a PhD, a scientist, and say, this is my experience. I've just had, I've written about her story in my book, a medical doctor in Melbourne who's come out of the closet and said, you know what, whether you believe me or not, this is my experience now. I've had experience of interacting with these galactic beings. And she's standing tall. And, her family thinks she's crazy. And she's dealing, she's married to a surgeon who thinks she's gone round the bend. But they get to a point where they can't deny it anymore, and they're just standing tall and saying, whether you like it or not. This is my experience now. This is how I am. You can take it or leave it. And I think this is what's happening more and more now, is that people are saying, you know what, you can think I'm round the bend. This is how it is for me, and this is what makes sense for me. But it's huge. It's absolutely huge, because if you're a lawyer or you're a doctor, as I say, or one of these professions where you're looked to as being reasonably credible, and here, you know, policemen, the number of policemen that have had experiences. I mean, Gary Heseltine in England is a police detective that now runs the UFO magazine there, UFO Truth magazine, because he's had over 1,000 policemen who've had experiences or seen craft or whatever. He started out collating all of that, and now he's running a UFO magazine, which goes global, about, you know, people with their experiences. Many of, you know, pilots, all these we see as credible people are having these experiences, and many of them are too afraid to come out because of their professions. But there are some brave souls that are actually doing it because they know that it's changed their lives and it's real. And this is the issue at the moment, isn't it? The truth embargo, where most of the public still is uninformed, and this is the problem. Until enough people come out that people can believe, then we're stuck with this conundrum, aren't we? That, you know, we're talking about this, but everybody says, oh yeah, you know, but a bit too weird for me.
Right. The three of us are products of English-speaking Western culture, and I think a lot of the cases that you discussed with us tonight seem to be English-speaking Western culture. I'm kind of curious to see what variations that you've seen with respect to people who claim this experience, who are perhaps Hindu or Buddhist or even Muslim. What variations do you see among those different faith groups?
It's really culture and religious beliefs. I've got a lovely young man in India who wrote to me. In fact, I've written his story. There's a new magazine in India called UFO India, or Indian UFO magazine. It's only been out, I think they're on their 3rd edition, which I sent the story, and I called it an Indian starseed, because this young man wrote to me and said, my biggest issue in my culture, Mary, is I know I'm not from here. I know that I've come to this planet from somewhere else. He said, but all my culture and the religious beliefs here that they are calling gods, and he says there's about 1 million gods in India, he said, and they all worship them. But he said, my understanding and my knowing is they're all extraterrestrials, and they're worshipping extraterrestrials, and it really, really upsets him. And he said, and the biggest problem is that with even my own family and friends, I can't tell them that that's what it is. As far as my understanding is, these gods that they're worshipping are literally extraterrestrials. So that's his dilemma, his cultural, spiritual dilemma, is that he has a knowing that that's not what it is. I've also met, I've talked to those in other cultures as well. Interestingly, in Buddhism, the Dalai Lama talks about the extraterrestrials, and that we should treat them as friends and treat them respectfully and lovingly. But we've also got, within Christian religious culture, where there are some churches that see these as demons, rather than, as the Catholic Church actually admits, they're not demons, that they are that this is a real experience, and that they're all God's children as well. They seem to be sitting quite nicely on the fence. But there are some Christian groups, fundamentalist groups, that literally see them as demons. So I've also heard from some, of the Islamic cultures. Again, some of them will recognize them or see them as demons, the jinn, as demons or entities. And some of them have a knowing that that's not the case, that some of these beings are, in fact, interdimensionals or extraterrestrials as well. So it seems to very much vary with the awareness of the individual coming and having a knowing, like this young man, Suryev, who wrote to me. He just knows. He can't cope with the way that his culture looks at them as gods when he knows different. And this is a knowing that he seems to have been born and been conscious with. So there's this awful dilemma that many that are coming in with this awareness, and others that have been programmed and conditioned to the cultural, spiritual, or religious belief of that culture, and they're fighting their knowing from what they're being taught to believe or expected to believe. And I've even had one young man suicidal because he was brought up in a Christian belief system where there was no such thing as extraterrestrials, and he is aware of his own experiences and his awareness that, that he looks at, what they're seeing as spiritual beings in a different way, and his family just can't cope with it. He said, because they can't cope, I can't talk about it. And he said, and I just don't want to be here because I can't tell them my truth because they just can't handle it, because their own dogma and belief system does not embrace the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And that is the problem with many of those that come in with those beliefs to see me. They may be, some brought up in a Christian Orthodox way or whatever, but they're having these experiences and it terrifies them because their belief system tells them it's a demon and therefore they must be bad. And, this is where our religions have to wake up and start realizing that more and more people are going to have these experiences. And are they going to send them away with huge fear, or are they going to actually start to get with the program and realize that many of these visits are coming from just advanced technology, beings with advanced technology? This is time to, to get with the modern program and stop coming from a medieval perspective.
Ed up on the chat room wants me to ask if you yourself have had any UFO contact experience, or have you ever had a close encounter, or are your conclusions based on these 3,000 cases that you dealt with?
All I can say is that I've seen UFOs. I'm not aware of ever consciously going on board craft, but I will say I've had individuals come to me and tell me they've seen me there. So I can only go from what they say, and not always in human form, I might add. But I also am aware that I feel like I sense sometimes around me beings that I call the non-human team. So I sort of, because I work as an energy worker and healer as well, I sort of tap into those realms a little bit, and I do feel that I am given information from what I call the non-human team. So I have a sense of them, but I certainly have never touched a craft. I've never physically touched any. I've never seen anything physically with my eyes. But I do have the sense and an understanding from just working intuitively, if you like. And that's as near as I can get. But I would love to one day actually go up on one and touch it and feel it, because I'd really like that. To have that tangibility, I suppose.
Yes. Earlier in the news, I know you missed it, we were talking about, I can't remember where Alejandro Rojas said where it was, but they saw a being and they thought it was good luck because that's how they looked at it in their culture. I think it was India.
Well, they a lot of these new children, they're seeing as just psychic kids, but they're not seeing it as this shift as well. But yes, it's still, interestingly, a lot of their academics that are seeing the images on the caves and beings being drawn there are admitting, as far as they're concerned, the Vimanas are craft, spacecraft, and that they've been visited. So the academics of India and Indian culture are coming very much to the party of there being extraterrestrials, not deities. And that was very much the push of my article, was not just Surya's story, but also what the Indian academics and in India Daily are reporting, some of these wonderful drawings of the Vimanas and beings on cave drawings. And certainly they're not seeing them as deities. They're seeing them as extraterrestrials.
Uh-huh. Now, earlier you mentioned that if someone believes that they're having an abduction experience, they'll go wild looking all over the internet for information. So, and you've been at this about 20 years, about when the internet started. Do you have an idea what things were like prior to the internet, if abductions were happening, or these experiences were happening prior to that?
I think it must have been really hard. And talking to the older generations, because there was very little out there on this, and it was really the the Barney Hill, Betty and Barney Hill stuff that was one of maybe the first that came out to explain this was somebody, a couple that had an experience. And then you got intruders with Bud Hopkins and Kathy, who spoke about her experiences and what have you. But there was very, very little. Whitney Strieber, of course, came out with Communion, but it was very, very small in terms of the kinds of understanding or experiences, and it was still considered extremely weird from what I understand, because I came into it, 94, 95 time, where, again, there was more and more information starting to be disseminated, and by that more and more people were being informed. But it was very, very hard and very, very scary. And you can understand why, there's a lot of relief now with those older generations as this is coming out and what have you. So I can't even imagine how difficult it was with people other than what they've told me, and how they just couldn't go there because it was just too scary.
And in these cases that you've received, particularly let's focus on children, the age 7, 8, it's like some of the ages of children you've described. Have you come across any child that has related to you something that would be even beyond the wildest dreams of any precocious child, in the sense that have they revealed anything about maybe particle physics or perhaps quantum physics that no child their age would really have any understanding of or any knowledge of, but that you knew that it was true?
Well, I've not been able yet to get the information to a level where I've been able to present it to the physicists in free yet. But I can actually tell you there are two particular cases that come to mind. One's a 10-year-old in England who spoke to his teacher saying that they teach in a linear fashion. He thinks in spirals. And he told me that when he was 7 or 8, he was given formula to create portals and had done all these drawings of that. The parents were very wary about it going anywhere. Another one was a young man of 9 who spoke to me, and initially he spoke because his father was speaking to me, and he said, "Can I speak to Mary?" And I said, "Why do you want to speak to me?" He said, "Well, I want to speak to you because of your frequency." He then proceeded to tell me that he was aware he came from Orion, that he was a light physicist. That was his title in that incarnation, and he was creating time travel technology. And he said, "My biggest problem on this planet," he said, "is the scientists here will not understand the physics that I understand because they are still quite primitive." And he said the other thing was that and he asked his father to do this, to get all the information on Nikola Tesla, because at least that was a good baseline for him in terms of showing what he understands. He was going to work from the work of Tesla, although that still was pretty basic, was how he explained it to me. Now, we're talking about a 9-year-old having absolutely no time for our particular physicists and their understanding, because it was still very primitive. I also talked to an 8-year-old who was talking about what he was being taught on the craft, and he said some of it is very complex. So I said to him, "Can you tell me some of the information that is so complex?" And he said, "No, because it's too complex for you."
Oh.
So where do you go with that? I mean, I'll leave that with you.
Here's a thought. Have you ever been in contact with someone that was claiming that they were being abducted, and all of a sudden they became missing, just plain disappeared?
At the time they believe they're being abducted, you mean?
Yes. I mean, you're talking to them, they're having these experiences, and then all of a sudden they become a missing person.
No, that's never happened, although some have rang me in great fear, knowing that they were going to be picked up that night. And I've actually had to talk to them and calm them down and what have you. And I use a very pragmatic sort of way of responding to that often as not, because I said, look, you've been picked up many times before, which, most of them are aware of. I said, they've always brought you back, still had your head attached to your body and your arms attached to your body and whatever, and you've still been able to go to work or to school or whatever it is the next day. I said, so the chances are of the same thing happening, if it happens tonight, is that you're still going to find yourself waking up in the morning, getting ready to go to work and what have you. Maybe very tired and exhausted, but still in one piece. And that seems to be, strangely, very comforting, is to remind them that they've been through this before and they've come out the other end. And, so as far as I know, that's always been the case with the ones that I've worked with. I wouldn't know about ones that have gone missing and never come back, because I've never come across that.
I see. Okay, about your book, The New Human Awakening to Our Cosmic Heritage, I believe you sent me that information. Is that a book that's out now, or is that coming out?
That's actually published now. I published it at the end of December. It's on Amazon for those out of Australia, which is the best way for them to access it. They can get it directly from me, actually, in Australia. The trouble is, sending it overseas is just ridiculous postage, so I just say it's cheaper for them to go via Amazon. But yes, it's available now.
And this is not the book that has the children that you've interviewed, or is it?
Yes, it is. Okay. The first 9 chapters are about the children and their parents, and then it goes into teenagers, and then it goes into adults that have had, activations and awareness of their experience, including the MD I talked about, the medical doctor, and including actually a minister of religion is in there coming out for the first time, and Dr. Lena Olson is she's coming out with her awareness of all the DNA changes as well. So it's quite comprehensive in looking at all the new programs of children.
All of these children you've spoken to, when you talk about upgrades, you talk about indigo children, you talk about ADHD really being misconstrued, all of these different concepts, with so many different cases and so many different people that you've interviewed, what is your hypothesis of what the end game is here? What is this all about? If this is a true phenomenon, then what is the goal? What is the end game, really? What's your hypothesis?
I've got a few, but the main one seems to be the evidence of having experiences when you get 85%, as we've now discovered through the surveys, having a psycho-spiritual transformation in terms of their paradigm shift and the way that they're redirected through it, seems to be certainly one of the goals of this interaction. And that was why I wrote Awakening, how it can transform your life, because it does. And Dr. Mack found this, that people changed in amazing ways, and usually very positive ways, once they came to terms with it and they understood it. So psycho-spiritual transformation means also they become more multidimensionally aware. My sense is the reason they want us to become more multidimensionally aware, more aware of the matrix, more aware of the holographic universe and our connection to everything, including these intelligences that for many ways are communicating with us telepathically. We're getting to a point, I believe, where we'll be able to interface with them on that level, that it's upgrading us to a point where we will be able to literally, rather than verbally, communicate. As these children are born telepathic, they will communicate with us telepathically, and we will have a true kind of communion with them, a true kind of understanding of who they are, what they're about. But there seems to be this upgrading is part of getting us ready for contact, getting us ready to acknowledge we're not the only ones in this universe, that there are many different species of intelligence out there, and that as we become galactic citizens, we need to be more evolved galactic citizens and do what they're doing, become part of that galactic community. So my sense is that we're getting prepared for contact in a very, very real way, and through this upgrading of our consciousness, that we can communicate in this way rather than rely on the very primitive vocal way that we're doing now, where there is a lot of misunderstandings. And as we all know, often the way we think and the way we say things doesn't always come out right. I think it's a purer way of communicating. So that's part of it, at least. Other stuff may be part of their agenda, and I think it's very, very complex, and I think it's multi-complex as well. But that's how I've come to understand it at this point, if that makes sense.
There was a skeptic or debunker, Randy, the magician, that used to say that if someone can prove 100% that they can be telepathic, I'll give them $1 million, that type of thing. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Yes.
Have you ever personally witnessed any of these telepathic communications from, seen it firsthand?
I've actually not seen it firsthand, but I've talked to many people that have experienced it with their families and with the children. And I have one from my own family where the child picked up on the mother's thoughts and did something quite bizarre that only could have been known if he'd picked it up from his mother. And this was within my own relatives. And I believe them absolutely because of what I heard. But I haven't had a telepathic communication with anyone. So unless I've experienced it actually myself or tested it out, no, I haven't. But I do know there are studies now being done with the autistic children with a medical doctor, a neuroscientist actually, that's doing that. And she's already found one savant that is actually doing this telepathic communication with his mother. And she's doing the testing. So it will come out and it will be shown at some point.
Very good. Well, Mary, do you want to give out your website information?
Absolutely. It's maryrodwell.com.au or it's ACERN, ACERN.com.au. And I've got a Facebook, and I've also, people can communicate with me through either of those methods. Or they just need to Google me because there's many presentations on YouTube and what have you as well.
Very good. Well, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. And have a wonderful afternoon, right? Or still morning there.
Yeah.
All right.
It is.
Take
Thank
care.
You.
Yeah,
Take care.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Here we are in the studio, and that is a wrap for today. Next week, we have John D'Souza. He is a former FBI agent. He'll be on next week. We do have a schedule all the way out to July, I think, of some really good guests coming up and some great shows. Thanks so much for listening live. And Donnie, thank you for joining in studio.
Thanks for having me.
All right. All right, everyone. So remember to keep your eyes to the sky.